The spaceship drifted through the cold void of space, a silent sentinel among the stars. Inside, the atmosphere was dim, lit only by the soft glow of holographic displays. The vessel's occupant moved with an eerie grace through the narrow corridors. Visara, the last of her kind. Her pale, almost translucent skin shimmered faintly under the artificial lighting, her eyes a haunting shade of crimson. Long, flowing dark hair framed her sharp features, and her movements spoke of centuries of solitude. She had always been alone, a predator among stars, driven by an insatiable hunger that gnawed at her very existence. The thirst was overwhelming, a constant ache deep within her being. Time had become irrelevant, a mere construct that no longer held meaning. Her once grand empire had fallen to dust, and her people had perished, one by one, consumed by the same insatiable hunger that now threatened to consume her. She had fled into the unknown reaches of the galaxy, seeking solace among the stars, a space traveler without a purpose other than to escape the relentless thirst that haunted her every breath. Visara's ship was more than just a vessel. It was her lifeline, her haven, and her prison. The sleek metallic walls hummed softly as the engines pulsed with a rhythm that kept her moving forward. Yet the further she drifted, the lonelier she became. Isolation was a familiar friend, a constant companion in her eternal struggle to resist the temptation of feeding on those weaker than herself. Her existence was a paradox. She was a creature of immense power, capable of bending the universe to her will, yet she was shackled by a hunger that surpassed her control. The stars were a cruel reminder of her immortality, a curse that granted her endless time but no true peace. Her once great thirst had driven her to the edges of known space, and now it drove her to desperation. Every moment, every passing second felt heavier than the last. Yet, even in her darkest moments, Visara held on to the belief that there was something more. Somewhere beyond the emptiness of the cosmos, there had to be a way to break free from her eternal thirst. Perhaps it was in the echoes of ancient knowledge, lost to the sands of time, or in the possibilities of a world untouched by her kind. It was this hope that kept her going, the faintest glimmer of possibility in a universe that had long turned against her. Her mind, however, was not just consumed by thirst. It was plagued by memories. Memories of a time when her kind had ruled the stars, when empires rose and fell under her command. Yet those memories were tainted, twisted by centuries of darkness. She could still see the faces of her people, the ones who had trusted her to lead them into a new dawn, only to be betrayed by their own hunger. Now, she was all that remained, a ghost in the vast abyss of space. Still, amidst the chaos of her thoughts, a small distant speck caught her attention, a blue planet, an anomaly in the sea of emptiness, a world teeming with life. It wasn't her usual target, primitive and vulnerable perhaps, but there was something different about this place. Her instincts screamed at her to feed, to drain the life from its inhabitants. Yet for the first time in centuries, her thirst wavered. A new curiosity stirred within her, a curiosity that made her pause. The ship settled gently onto the surface of the blue planet, cloaked in shadows and silence. Visara stepped out into the cool atmosphere, her senses heightened, absorbing every detail of her new surroundings. The lush greenery stretched endlessly in all directions, the sounds of life pulsing softly in the distance. It was a world untouched by her kind, untouched by the chaos of hunger and power. For centuries, she had existed on the fringes of civilization, seeking only to survive. Feeding had become a routine, a desperate, mindless act necessary to sustain her existence. But here, among these primitive beings, there was something different. The thirst still gnawed at her, but it wasn't as sharp as it once was. It felt distant, dulled by the unfamiliar sensations that surrounded her. She wandered through the dense forests, her presence silent and elusive. The creatures of this world moved about without fear, unknowing of the predator that stalked them. They were fragile, simple in their existence. but there was a purity to them that seemed to call out to something deeper within her. Visara had lived in darkness for so long, feeding on weakness and fear. Yet here, in this place of innocence, something stirred that wasn't fear. It was curiosity, and something even more intangible. Hours passed as she roamed, her thoughts drifting between memories and the unfamiliar sensations of the world. She had come to this planet seeking nourishment, but now her hunger felt more complicated. There was a conflict brewing within her, a conflict between the need to consume and the desire to understand. The latter was foreign, something she had never allowed herself to feel. It was during one of her restless explorations that she came across a village. It was small, simple, human in its most basic form. The inhabitants were gathered around fires, sharing stories and laughter. The sight was both heartwarming and unsettling. Visara had never witnessed such genuine moments of connection. Her kind thrived on isolation, on the cold, calculated pursuit of survival. But here, among these people, was a warmth that she hadn't known existed. Her thirst returned in full force as she watched them, their emotions raw and vibrant. It was unbearable, an all-consuming hunger that clouded her thoughts and instincts. Yet, instead of fleeing, she approached. Her presence was both feared and welcomed, though the villagers were hesitant to speak to her directly. She didn't need to feed immediately. For the first time in centuries, she lingered, absorbed in the quiet observation of life, of a world that seemed to embrace its fragility. Then, through the crowd, he appeared, a man with warm eyes and a steady gaze. His presence was calm, grounding, and something within Visara felt a strange pull toward him. He moved toward her slowly, not with fear, but with a quiet strength that made her pause. "Are you thirsty?" he asked, his voice a gentle whisper in the night. Visara felt her breath catch in her throat. Her fangs ached to sink into his skin, to quench the thirst that had driven her to the edge of sanity. Yet, she hesitated. The man's gaze met hers without flinching, as if offering a part of himself willingly. "I don't want to harm you," she said finally, her voice barely more than a whisper. He smiled softly, a simple yet profound gesture that shook her to her core. The tension between them was palpable, a delicate balance of trust and fear. Visara's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to feed, yet her heart held her back. For the first time in centuries, her hunger felt more than physical. It felt like something deeper, something that could not be easily understood or dismissed. Visara's breath was shallow, her fangs still hovering just above his skin. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. It was a sensation so intoxicating, so tempting, that it threatened to overwhelm her entirely. Yet, something restrained her, a force stronger than the thirst that had driven her for centuries. "I don't understand," she murmured, pulling back just slightly, her crimson eyes meeting his gaze once more. The hunger was still there, clawing at her, but it felt different now, less urgent, more conflicted. "Why would you offer this to me?" The man's smile deepened, his calm unwavering. "Because I believe that even you deserve compassion." His words hung in the air, simple yet profound, as if they carried the weight of ages. Visara studied him, her mind struggling to reconcile what she was experiencing. She had lived through centuries of solitude, of feeding and fleeing, always consumed by the hunger that defined her existence. She had never encountered someone like him, someone who offered himself without fear, without hesitation. The very thought unsettled her. "Compassion?" she repeated softly, her voice distant as her thoughts swirled in a chaotic torrent. "You don't know what I am. You don't know what I've done. And I don't need to," he responded, his tone gentle but firm. "You're here and that's enough." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. She felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be for centuries. There was no armor to shield her from the truth. She was more than just a predator. Beneath the hunger and the power, there was something fragile, a part of her that had long been buried under the weight of her existence. "I've lost everything," she whispered, her voice tinged with sorrow. "My people, my purpose. This hunger is all I have left." "But it doesn't have to be," he said softly. "You don't have to be alone." His words resonated within her, stirring something deep inside her that she hadn't felt in centuries. Hope. She had always believed that she was bound to her fate, destined to exist in the shadows of the universe, alone in her eternal thirst. Yet, this man saw past that darkness. He saw something more. "I can't. It's not that simple," she said, her voice faltering as the conflict within her grew stronger. The thirst threatened to consume her, but so did the yearning to understand, to be understood. NPR. "I know," he replied, his smile unwavering, "but it starts with a choice." Visera's breath hitched again, and for the first time her fangs began to retract. The hunger still pulsed through her, but it was dimming, softening under the weight of his presence. The darkness that had ruled her existence for centuries felt less oppressive in that moment. "I don't know how," she admitted, her voice shaking with the weight of centuries of loneliness. "And that's okay," he said gently. "We don't have to figure it all out at once." A strange calm settled over her, something she hadn't experienced in a very long time. The thirst was still there, a steady hum beneath her skin, but it no longer ruled her. For the first time in centuries, she felt the possibility of something more, a possibility beyond her hunger, beyond her isolation. The night deepened, and Visera remained still, her crimson eyes fixed on the man before her. The air between them was thick with unspoken words and the weight of centuries of solitude. The villagers had quietly dispersed, retreating to their homes as the darkness deepened, leaving the two of them alone under the starlit sky. Visera felt the stillness settle into her being, a contrast to the storm of emotions she had been grappling with since meeting him. "I don't know if I can stay," she finally whispered, breaking the silence. Her voice was a soft tremor, filled with uncertainty and the ache of her eternal thirst. "It's not that simple. I've lived in the shadows for so long." He stepped closer, his gaze steady, unwavering. "And you don't have to stop living in the shadows all at once," he said. "But you don't have to stay there either." Visera shook her head, a faint smile flickering on her lips, though it held little humor. "You speak of choices, but my kind doesn't work like that. We are bound by our hunger, by what we are. We don't change easily." "You're not the same as you once were," he responded, his voice calm yet firm. "You've seen more than hunger. You've felt more than darkness. You've been here, among them, among us. You felt something else." He was right. Visera knew it deep down. She had felt the stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in centuries, a connection, however fragile it might be. It was foreign, unsettling, yet it was a spark she couldn't ignore. And for the first time, she felt torn between her instincts and her desires. "I don't know if I can resist it," she admitted. "The thirst is overwhelming, and I've survived this long by giving into it. But medes kutrain. Survival isn't living," he said gently, his voice a soft melody in the night. "You've existed, but you've never truly lived. That's what you're afraid of, letting go, letting something else take its place." Visera closed her eyes, a weary sigh escaping her lips. She felt the weight of his words sink into her soul. The hunger wasn't just for blood anymore. It was a hunger for something more profound, a hunger for meaning beyond her existence as a predator. "I don't even know where to begin," she murmured. "The thought of letting go scares me more than the hunger itself." "And it should," he replied, "but it's a step you don't have to take alone." His words resonated deeply, stirring something within her that had been buried under centuries of darkness. She had always been a solitary figure, isolated by her thirst and her duty. Yet here he was, offering not just comfort, but a hand to walk beside her through the unknown. Visera opened her eyes, meeting his gaze once again. The hunger was still present, but it no longer controlled her. It was a part of her, yes, but it no longer defined her entirely. There was something new, a possibility for a different kind of existence. "I'll try," she said softly, her voice filled with resolve. "I can't promise I'll succeed, but I'll try." A small smile touched his lips. "That's all I ask." For a moment they simply stood there, bathed in the quiet serenity of the night. The stars above shone brighter than before, casting a gentle glow over their shared space. Visera felt a peace she hadn't known in centuries, a fragile, tentative calm that allowed her to breathe. It was a moment she hadn't thought possible, a moment where the darkness within her didn't seem as suffocating as it once did. The thirst was still there, a constant presence at the edges of her thoughts, but now it no longer felt like a relentless force threatening to consume her. It was a part of her, a part she could learn to live with, to manage. And perhaps, in time, it would be something she could coexist with, not simply survive. The first light of dawn began to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the quiet village. Vesra stood at the edge of the village square, the cool breeze brushing through her dark hair. The man watched her from a short distance, his presence steady and unwavering, despite the weight of their shared night. "You don't have to leave," he said softly, his voice carrying over the quiet hum of the morning. "You could stay. You don't have to be alone anymore." Visera turned slightly, her crimson eyes meeting his gaze. The temptation was there, an undeniable pull toward the life he offered, the connection they had forged in the depths of the night. But the pull was fraught with complexities she couldn't easily dismiss. "I don't belong here," she said quietly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This world isn't mine to claim. I've walked too far down a path that has no return." "It doesn't mean you can't find a new one," he replied gently. "We've all made mistakes. We've all faced our own darkness. But it's never too late to try and carve out something different." Visera closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of his words settle into her being. There had been moments in her long life when she believed that her destiny was sealed, that the hunger was her only constant, her only purpose. But now, standing in the quiet light of a new day, she felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in centuries: hope. "I don't know how," she admitted softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "I've lived in darkness for so long, it's hard to imagine anything else." "And you don't have to imagine it all at once," he said with a reassuring smile. "You take it one step at a time, one moment after another." The idea was daunting, overwhelming even, but it was also liberating. The thought of living beyond mere survival, beyond the weight of her endless thirst, felt both terrifying and tantalizing. "You don't have to make any decisions now," he continued. "Just know that the offer will always be there, whenever you're ready." For a moment, the only sound was the distant rustle of leaves in the wind. Visera stood in thoughtful silence, the dawn unfolding around her. She could feel the warmth of his presence, a comforting contrast to the cold void that had been her companion for so long. "I don't even know if I can trust myself anymore," she finally confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "The hunger, it's never gone. And sometimes I fear that if I let go, it will consume me again." His smile faded into a gentle seriousness, but his voice remained steady. "The hunger will always be a part of you, but it doesn't have to control you. You're more than your thirst. You've shown that tonight." Visera opened her eyes, her gaze fixed on the horizon, where the sun was beginning to rise higher into the sky. The village around her slowly came to life, children laughing, birds singing, and the hum of daily life returning. It was a scene she had witnessed countless times from the edges of existence, always detached, always apart. But now, there was something different in her observation. This time, when she looked up, it was for the entire world, as Vincent Frankenstein moves between the... I feel like an outsider, she admitted softly, a faint sadness in her voice. I've lived so long without this kind of connection. I'm not sure how to fit into a world like this. You don't need to fit in, he said. You just need to be part of it, in your own way. And that's enough. Visera took a deep breath, her fingers brushing against the fabric of her cloak. The weight of her past still lingered, but it no longer loomed over her as it once did. There was a space now, a space where hope and possibility could exist. You've given me something I never thought I'd have again, she said quietly, her voice full of both gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know if it's enough, but it means something. It means everything, he replied simply, his words grounding her in the moment. With the dawn fully established in the sky, Visara watched as the village around her grew vibrant with life. She felt the pull of her thirst still, a constant companion that she would never fully escape. But for the first time, she realized that there was more to her existence than the hunger. There was a chance, no matter how fragile, to build something new, something beyond mere survival. The village hummed with activity as the day continued, the warmth of the sun spreading across the landscape. Visara stood near the edge of the forest, her presence a quiet contrast to the lively surroundings. The villagers moved about without fear, their lives intertwining in a web of routines and simple joys. Yet, even as she watched from the shadows, a sense of unease lingered within her, a constant reminder of her place in this world. The man from the night before had returned to her side once more, walking beside her through the soft underbrush. His presence was a steady force, grounding and calming in a way she hadn't felt in centuries. Together, they moved through the woods, their quiet companionship easing the tension that clung to her like a second skin. You don't have to keep your distance, he said, his voice gentle but firm. You're not an outsider anymore, not truly. Visera glanced at him, her crimson eyes softening as they met his. You say that, but the truth is I've spent so long apart from everyone else. I don't know how to belong anymore. You don't have to belong in the way you think, he replied. You just need to be here, to share in the small moments, in the quiet connections that make life worth living. She fell silent, the weight of his words settling over her. It was a simple idea, but one that felt impossibly complex after centuries of isolation. Visera had lived through empires falling, entire civilizations fading into the void of history. The vastness of space had been her home, a lonely expanse where she floated aimlessly from star to star. Here, in this tiny village, surrounded by people who offered their trust freely, she felt both lost and found. The thirst, she began hesitantly, her voice tinged with apprehension. It's always there, a part of me I can't escape. I know, he said softly, nodding, but it doesn't have to control you. It's a part of your past, not your future. You don't need to carry the weight of it all the time. Visara's lips pressed into a thin line. You make it sound so simple. It's not, he admitted with a small, understanding smile. But it's worth the effort. They walked deeper into the woods, the soft rustling of leaves the only sound between them. Visara found herself pondering his words, reflecting on the years she had spent in solitude, battling the hunger that never truly abated. She thought back to the nights spent in silence, the endless stretches of darkness where only the thirst dictated her actions. How could she simply let go of that? Yet, as they continued forward, a small seed of doubt began to take root. Could she really leave the past behind? Could she carve out a new existence, one where her thirst no longer dictated her every move? The notion was terrifying, but there was also a flicker of something else, something brighter, more hopeful. "You don't have to have all the answers," he said quietly, sensing her internal struggle. "It's okay to move slowly, to take the small steps when the larger ones feel impossible." They paused at a small clearing, bathed in golden light. Vesara stood still, her gaze sweeping over the lush landscape. The hunger still lingered, a constant ache beneath her skin, but for the first time she didn't feel consumed by it. It was there, a part of her, but it wasn't all she was. "I've spent so long running from everything," she admitted softly. "Even running from myself. And you don't have to run anymore," he said gently. "You've found a place to stand, even if it's unsteady at first." A quiet, healing peace settled within her. It wasn't perfect, and the path ahead was uncertain, but it was a beginning, a small, tentative step forward. The world around her continued its gentle rhythm, and for the first time in centuries, Vesara allowed herself to truly listen. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village, Vesara stood at the edge of the forest once again. The village was quieter now, the daily routines winding down into the stillness of the evening. She felt the pull of the hunger as a constant, a familiar weight pressing against her consciousness. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, she felt more than the relentless thirst. She felt a glimmer of something far deeper, connection. The man walked beside her, his steady presence offering a silent comfort. They moved slowly, their steps guided by unspoken understanding. There was no need for words. Their companionship was born out of shared silence, shared moments of peace that neither of them had thought possible. "You don't have to fight it alone," he said softly, breaking the quiet. Vesara glanced at him, her crimson eyes reflecting the fading light. "It's hard not to. The hunger is always there, waiting. No matter how much time passes, it doesn't change." "No, it doesn't," he agreed gently. "But how you face it, how you live with it, that's what matters." She exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of his words settle within her. They walked on in silence once more, the forest wrapping around them like a protective embrace. The natural world felt less threatening than it once had. For centuries, Vesara had seen the universe as a cold and indifferent place, filled with opportunities for consumption and survival. But here, amidst the trees and gentle streams, there was something more, something that spoke of life's enduring resilience. "You've shown me something I thought I lost long ago," Vesara said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've made me question everything I've believed." "That's not a bad thing," he responded softly. "Belief is fluid. It shifts, it changes, especially when you allow yourself to see beyond what you think you know." "I thought I was beyond change," she admitted, "that I was destined to exist in the darkness, forever driven by the hunger, but you've shown me another path." "Maybe you've been ready for that path for a long time," he said with a smile. "You just didn't know it yet." The weight of her past still pressed against her, but it no longer felt suffocating. The hunger, while persistent, no longer defined her entirely. There was room now, a space where her existence could grow beyond mere survival. They paused by a stream that trickled gently through the woods. The cool water reflected the dim light of the evening, and Vesara watched the ripples move in gentle waves. She knelt by the water's edge, dipping her fingers into the cold flow. The sensation was refreshing, grounding. It was a reminder that even in the smallest moments, there was life. There was more than just darkness. "I used to think my power made me invincible," she said, her voice barely a whisper against the soft sounds of the stream. "That nothing could touch me because I was a creature of the night. But now, I see how fragile it all really is." "You're stronger than you know," he said, his voice a comforting presence. "Strength doesn't come from power alone. It comes from how you choose to face the world, from how you allow yourself to grow." Vesara closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the gentle breeze play against her skin. There was a peace in that moment, a quiet understanding that perhaps she didn't need to be something different entirely. Maybe it wasn't about shedding her past, but about learning to coexist with it, to integrate it into a life that wasn't solely consumed by the hunger. "I'll never forget what I am," she said softly, "but maybe that doesn't have to define everything." "Exactly," he replied with a gentle smile, "and as long as you walk forward, even if you stumble, you'll always find your way back." The night deepened further, the stars shining brighter above the forest canopy. Visera stood once more, the stillness of the world wrapping around her like a familiar comfort. The hunger still whispered at the edges of her thoughts, but now it felt like a part of her, something she could understand, manage, and perhaps even embrace. She wasn't alone in her journey anymore, and that, more than anything, gave her the strength to keep going.